Hi, hello, my name is Gomer Joseph. I hope you've all been having a great day so far. Welcome back to another True Crime Tuesdays video. If you are new, I welcome you. Today, I will be discussing the Rosewood tragedy of 1923. This has to be the oldest case that I have covered so far. Now, I first heard about this case when I was pretty young, so if it wasn't for me looking up old movie trailers on my computer back in the early 2000s, I don't think that I would ever have heard about this case. Doing the research, I was actually pretty surprised about how different the actual events were from the movie. But as a writer myself, I do understand why Hollywood decides to do certain things when it comes to their movies and their TV programs. Researching this case was insane. It's just crazy to think about how such a small town in this country could just disappear all because of the sketchy claims of one individual. I encourage you all to do your own research with this case and not to just look at my video for all of the information. Here we go. Now, it was really kind of difficult to really see where I could actually start this case, so I mean, in order to actually discuss this case and make things make sense, I am just going to go ahead and jump right through it. On January 1st of 1923, 22-year-old Fannie Taylor from Sumner, Florida was screaming through the top of her lungs for help. Fannie was telling her neighbors that a random man came into her home and attacked her. According to the neighbors, they did notice, all these, marks of beatings on her. But you might be wondering, what sort of man did Fannie claim attacked her? The sort of man who Fannie claimed attacked her was a black man. Word got out to her husband, James Taylor, who was working at the local mill, and he was heated. Because according to James Taylor, not only was his wife attacked by a man, but he hears that a black man attacked his wife. And if you're, because again, with this month, I'm really discussing the tragedies that were taken in the Jim Crow era. So, if you have seen my previous videos before, you know that a black person does not do certain things to white people. It could be the littlest thing, but if you were to attack a white man or woman, then you are just as good as dead in the Jim Crow South. Here's the thing, I completely get it. I understand that any man would be upset hearing that his wife was assaulted. And of course, you don't like feeling helpless. You don't like having this feeling of you not being able to do anything when your wife was harmed. But, the police were informed about this situation, so you'd think that James would just sit by and let the cops get to the bottom of this. For James, that was not the case. He decided to take matters into his own hands by gathering a group together. It was a group of white men, and in this group of white men, there were plenty of KKK members, forming a group of an angry mob of about 500 men. This angry mob was on their way to find the person who Fannie claimed had harmed her, marching over to the town of Rosewood. So by 1923, Rosewood was a pretty successful but small town of about 200 to 300 people, and the majority of these residents in this town were black. Like I said, this is a pretty successful town. The residents built their own homes and churches. Now let's get back to the search for the supposed attacker. Now, the police discovered that convict Jesse Hunter escaped from prison, and they were considering him to be the suspect of the attack on Fannie Taylor. This is why the angry mob was heading to Rosewood, because they felt like the suspect, Jesse Hunter, was hiding there. Now, the thing about this mob, they did have search dogs with them, and they arrived to the home of a man named Aaron Carrier. Now, I don't know if they asked him questions or if they had that shoot first and ask questions later mentality, because all I know was that Aaron was beaten by this mob, but Sheriff Robert Walker stepped in. Sheriff Walker steps in, he stops the beating and places Aaron in protective custody. Looking into this case, I'm going to assume that there were different groups of this angry mob, because from what I gathered, there was this other group that approached the house of Sam Carter, assuming that he was also hiding Jesse Hunter, and they beat Sam. The beatings would stop after he admitted that he was hiding Jesse Hunter. But the thing about his confession is that I don't know if he actually was hiding Jesse Hunter or if Sam only confessed just because he wanted the beatings to stop. After the beatings stopped, he led the mob to the woods and they expected to find Jesse Hunter there. When Jesse Hunter was nowhere in sight, they shot Sam and took his life. Word was getting out that these dangerous white men were out for blood. On January 4th of 1923, about 25 people would take refuge inside of the house of Sarah Carrier, who was Aaron Carrier's aunt. And the thing about Sarah was that she also did laundry for the Taylors. Sadly, the mob would approach the house, and once they approached it, they surrounded this house and shots were fired. Sarah's son, Sylvester Carrier, was a World War I veteran and music teacher who never took disrespect from anyone, not caring if you're black or white. The thing about Sylvester is that I don't know why the mob thought this, but members of the mob also suspected him of the attack because of how bold he was. The thing about Sylvester is that he owned a gun, and since there are these people who were coming to his house trying to cause damage, he obviously shot back. Thinking about this, of course, this is another reason why I am pro 2A, because people are crazy out here, and I would like the chance to defend myself against, crazy people. Sylvester was able to take out 2 men in this mob, but unfortunately, his mother, Sarah's life was taken because of the crossfire. Sadly, Sylvester would eventually lose his life too, due to him pretty much being outnumbered. Since Sylvester was no longer alive to defend himself and to defend the people inside of the house, the angry mob broke into the house, but by the grace of God, the kids who were inside were able to sneak out of the house into the woods to hide. After hearing that 2 white men were taken out by a black man, this had white people in Jim Crow, Florida absolutely pissed. More white men would arrive in Rosewood. In their mindsets, they had this, thinking that there was some race war breaking out only because Sylvester took out 2 white men who were trying to take his life. And, I guess when a black person commits self-defense, that's a race war. But anyways, that's what they had in their mind. So I guess in their mind, they had to go ahead and save their race, which is just really a sad look of things, because all of us come from Adam and Eve. We are all one race, but because of the effects of sin, it has allowed this sort of hatred to pour out into the hearts of certain people who didn't see you as human because you had more melanin than they did. When the group grew, what I found to be very strange was that the churches that were burned down were their first targets. Hearing that, it was just clear to me that these monsters had no fear of God, and since their first target were churches, you cannot convince me that these monsters did not allow Satan himself to influence the wickedness that they were committing that day. Because after hearing about Fanny, after hearing that Sylvester took out 2 white men while he was defending himself, or at least doing his best to defend himself, the goal now was to burn down Rosewood. After burning down the churches, they would proceed to burn down the homes of people. Now, once again, these were houses that the residents built for themselves. And it's just really heartbreaking to know that the houses that were built on hard work were destroyed because these racist monsters had their feelings hurt over something that had no physical evidence to back it up, and over something that the residents of this town had nothing to do with. What's even worse was that when the houses were burned down, these monsters would shoot at people who were escaping the burned houses. Surviving Rosewood citizens would flee into the swamps, hiding there for days. Some would attempt to leave the swamps looking for help, but the sheriffs, the men in blue, quote unquote, who are supposed to protect and serve, pretty much turned them away. But by God's grace, there were a couple of white families, like the family of general store owner John Wright, who did show compassion, showing the residents of Rosewood that not all white people are crazy, and hid the survivors in their homes. Sarah Carrier also had another son named James. Now, he was hiding in the swamps at one point, but he did leave the swamps to take refuge, being held by a manager in the local factory. Somehow, he was found by the mob, but unfortunately, they forced him to dig up his own grave and shot him. I can't even begin to imagine what was going on through James's head during those final moments. Women and children survivors were rescued by the wealthy Bryce brothers, who were John and William. These two were white Northerners who owned a train and helped the women and children to flee. Here's my only complaint about this. So the thing about this, praise God they were able to help the women and children, but they refused to take black men onto this train. The reason is that they feared the angry mob would come after them for helping out black men. But again, the angry mob was taking the lives of women and children too. The women and children who were on the trains were definitely fleeing from something. But I also have to take into account that one of the main suspects, the main suspect that they were looking for, was Jesse Hunter, a black man. So I assume that in the mind of the Bryce brothers, they didn't want to go ahead and take their chance at either hiding Jesse unknowingly or hiding someone that knew Jesse, or they just didn't want to take the chance of the mob mistaking a male black refugee as Jesse Hunter. Overall, it's just sad that black men couldn't take refuge on this train because the mob was looking for one specific man. Hearing about the chaos in Rosewood, Florida Governor Kerry Hardy offered to send the National Guard, but Sheriff Walker refused to help because he felt like he had everything under control. Sir, the whole town is burned down except for John Wright's house because he's one of the only white people who lived in Rosewood. And the rest of the residents who actually did live there either lost their homes or lost their lives. So you don't have it under control. What the governor did do was that he sent a jury and prosecutor to investigate this mess. From what I gathered, I don't think that they knew what they were doing because they only heard the testimonies of white people, and those testimonies didn't help make any convictions. It's honestly the whole tragedy of this is that all this mess happened all because of the story of one lady without a proper investigation. You already heard the first side of Fanny's story, but there's also two different sides. According to the black folks, Fanny had a white lover who attacked her, who beat her up, because you had to explain the bruises. So according to them, Fanny had a white lover who was beating her up when her husband was away at work. The third theory was that her husband was the one who beat her because she was either not doing her chores or he found her with another man, but she claimed that this man was black and that he had assaulted her. Because, like, when she, was first screaming and hollering and everything, like, again, like, they did see the bruises, so she did admit to being attacked, but as to admit that you were assaulted by a black person pretty much meant that you were defiled. I mean, when you're assaulted by somebody, like, you're defiled either way. It doesn't matter what color they are. But yeah, I mean, of course, Fanny's not here. She's not alive to go ahead and actually tell the truth. But again, like I mentioned before, all of this mess happened all because there was no proper investigation. For so many years, the residents of Rosewood were absolutely terrified to ever go back because, I mean, of course, there's not really anything to go back to. Like, the whole town is, like, burned to the ground. But they were really afraid that if they were to have ever stepped foot back into Rosewood, then they would lose their lives. So 70 years after the events of Rosewood took place, after a legal battle to get reparations for what did occur in 1923, the survivors were paid $150,000 each, which I think is justified. Like, again, since they didn't really have any, trials or convictions, I mean, you might as well, get paid for, the emotional trauma that this tragedy created, because again, it's not like anybody was convicted, so you might as well get the reparations that you pretty much deserve. And again, this was, they got the reparations in 1994, and now it is 2023. It is 100 years since the events of Rosewood took place. Like I've mentioned before, knowing that nobody was prosecuted for their involvement in this is extremely disappointing. But what we can keep in mind is that if those monsters did not repent of their sins and trust in Jesus Christ alone to save them, then God made sure that those responsible would face judgment in the next life. Since this did happen 100 years ago, none of the survivors are living. Even though they're not around anymore to tell their stories, it is our responsibility to share their stories so that it is never forgotten. Those who lost their lives in this tragedy should definitely be remembered. And though these stories are tragic and uncomfortable, I don't want these victims to lose their lives in vain. But thank you all for taking the time in your day to watch this video. If you did like this video, please feel free to hit the like button. If you have any thoughts on this case at all, please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. If you'd like to see more videos from me, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about the next video. If there is a certain true crime case that you'd like me to cover, go ahead and let me know. I will see y'all from next True Crime Tuesdays, and I'll talk to y'all later.